Hi, I just put on a video by Dussek. It's his Sonatina in G major, and it's from the grade 6 celebration series, the Royal Conservatory of Music program. This is a really popular piece that a lot of students end up choosing as one of their list B pieces in this grade level. It's really fun to play. It's got a lot of energy to it. But I just wanted to give you some practice tips based on a few things that I noticed in students over the years that are trying to learn this piece and some issues that they encounter, and even tips for memory in here. The first thing is, this song has a lot of fast 16th notes in the left hand, and sometimes the right hand comes in at the same time with running 16th notes. So you've got, after this section, then you have 16th notes. Times those running 16th notes, we get funny rhythms happening in them. They're not quite even, and the volume level isn't as even as it should be, or we're having problems getting them up to speed. One of the things that can happen is you could be playing with a wrong hand position. You don't want to have your pinky laying down. Sometimes I see left hand doing this, leaning down, coming up. I can't do it here. There we go. And so we're coming down to that pinky, and the thumb is even quite low. So we don't want to have that position. We want our pinky and our thumb to be standing a little higher so that this is all really even. Our fingers are different lengths. So as you're playing on the piano, you don't want to be twisting or tilting your hand in order to accommodate the different lengths in the fingers. Rather, you need to make sure that your fingers are all the same height on the piano so you don't have to twist. So your thumb's going to be higher up, and your pinky as well. If I'm showing you this hand, I'll move down a bit. He's going to be standing, and you don't want to be coming down to play him on his side. And that's one thing that's going to help you gain speed if you get the right hand position. And you avoid too much movement in the left hand. So you want it to look like more like this. The fingers are going, but your hand isn't moving anywhere. So that'll help you gain speed. The other thing that you can do to practice is playing in chord form. I talked about this in another song that we did recently in the grade 6 book, but instead of playing all those broken notes, see them as a chord. So you have a G major inversion chord here, 3 times going to C major, and I'm working through bar 5 onwards right now. So if you're practicing hands together, D major. And this is really helpful starting on bar 29 as well, because this left hand again is doing all of those running 16th notes. So practice it solid, and notice you have a C major chord. It's an inversion going to G major, going to D major, an inversion, back to G, C, G. It's a D7th chord, but they're missing the D, but it's part of a D7th chord. D chord, G, C, G, then an A minor chord, going to a G inversion, D major, and you're home free. So solid form like that will help position your fingers in the right spot. By the time you're playing the first note of that group of 4 16th notes, then all the fingers are already set on that chord, and that'll facilitate you getting those runs a little bit faster, smoother, and it'll help your memory too as you analyze where the chords are going through. So you might want to just rewind this video and even just mark in pencil in each of the bars what those chords are, because then your mind, having played so much technique, you're going to see the D major notes in your mind, D, F sharp, A. Even if it's in an inversion, you can visualize that, and your hand can find that shape a lot easier. But again, I stress, you want limited movement in the hand and the arm as you're playing that, and leave it for the fingers to do the work. Make sure your hand is high enough and you're not tilting it as you're reaching the pinky. You're leaning down as you're reaching your thumb, because any extra movement is going to slow your potential tempo down quite a bit, and it might produce some accents as you're coming down on the finger, and we don't want any notes accented sticking out in this as well. Now the other problem that I see happening sometimes is when both hands get running 16th notes, like on 29th, on the end of bar 30, we've got, and then it goes back to 8th notes again in the right hand. But here, sometimes if you listen hard, you'll find that the notes in the left and right don't simultaneously land as close as they should, and they're just kind of off a little bit. You might have one hand that's weaker than the other. Per se, you're right-handed and your left hand's a little weaker. So for practicing that, you can incorporate some staccato practice, even though ultimately this is going to be legato, but it can help you tighten up where they've had getting used to lining things up together. So you could practice and just have a really light staccato going on there. You could also do staccato, which is one of the hands or the right hand, and then merge it back into legato again. But I find staccato practicing between the hands when they're not lining up properly can really help organize that and make it sound, well, not chaotic as you're playing it, because it has to be quite precise. You can also incorporate rhythms. So instead of using the running 16th notes or the staccatos, you could do like we call it a Timry rhythm, or it's a dotted 8th with the 16th note attached, and that would sound like, and then, and practicing with some of those rhythms help you gain control over what your fingers are doing as well, and then take the rhythm away. But those are a few ways that you could practice to tighten up the running 16th notes between both hands, because sometimes I find they kind of fall apart a little bit and they're not as precise as they should be for this classical music. And the other thing that I find too, when the left hand is so busy, we sometimes have problems with our voicing. And what I mean by voicing is we want to hear that melody note ringing out. And when you have a really busy left hand, if I go back to bar 5, it might be drowning out the melody line that we want to hear. So that's not what I want to hear. So we want that melody note to ring out, even though the left hand's so busy, so we need to lighten the left hand a bit more. Yeah, so we want to hear that voicing happen. It has to have good balance. So one technique that I employ sometimes with students is I do ghosting. And ghosting is simply where I'm not actually playing the left hand notes, but I'm moving on top of them, and I'm helping my brain control my muscles, and I want a heavier right hand and I ghost the left hand, and it helps me get that balance with students sometimes. So you would practice moving on the note. And as students are practicing that, sometimes we'll hear a note or two come out. Sometimes it's actually really hard to ghost and we're still pressing notes down. But if you can control that and get a ghosting happening in the left hand, then once that feels comfortable, you can go back into actually playing it, but having less arm weight going into the left hand and more emphasis on the right hand. So we hear that beautiful melody ringing through. Otherwise it can sound really busy and messy, and we lose sight of the melodic line, and we don't want that to happen. So on all those busy sections, that tends to be what happens a lot with students in this grade 6 level. And memory, you have a nice little chord section in here on bar 21. Your right hand and left hand share an A7 chord. So identify bar 21 and 22. It's just an A7th mixed up between the right hand and left hand. That's the only notes they play. So A, C sharp, E, and G. So again, I'm coming back. If you're memorizing and analyzing your music and knowing what chord you're playing in there, and what key changes might happen in the song can help you plot and your memory for the whole piece. But I think those are the biggest issues: the coordinating the 16th notes, balancing that melodic line. So you've got staccato practice you can use, rhythmic practice you can use. And ultimately you want this piece to be at a quite steady tempo. So metronome, that's your best friend. Again, is using that metronome, setting it at a low enough pace that you can maintain a steady speed, because usually there's sections in a piece that you know really well and you play it faster. Maybe you've learnt the first 2 lines and you've been playing that longer than you have the entire piece, so ultimately those 2 lines are going to be really fast and the rest isn't. So when you start working with the metronome, find the piece at the pace that you can do the entire piece at the same steady tempo, and then work it all up together from that base speed that you have. But the metronome is really valuable in this, because in classical music, you really have to have control of the tempos as well. So I hope this has helped a little bit. If there's any other issues with the song that you're having trouble with, please feel free to message me. I'm always here to help, and I hope this helped a bit. Thanks very much for joining me.